You don't belong here. Those 5 words would destroy Detective Ryan Cole's career forever. Dr. Amara Johnson stepped out of her Mercedes, her hospital badge gleaming in the morning sun. She just finished a 16-hour shift saving lives. Cole's eyes narrowed with disgust. Another thug trying to break into cars. He slammed her against the vehicle so violently her ribs cracked. The stethoscope around her neck cut into her throat as he dragged her down. Her medical bag exploded open, syringes, prescription pads, surgical tools scattering across the asphalt. You people always have excuses, Cole snarled, driving his knee into her spine. Other officers circled like vultures, their body cameras conveniently malfunctioning. One kicked her credentials under the car. Another laughed, uploading the footage to his private chat. Dr. Johnson's vision blurred, but she could still see the hospital entrance 30 yards away. The building where her name hung on the wall, Dr. Amara Johnson, Chief of Emergency Medicine. The woman he was brutalizing literally ran the department that would soon treat his own dying daughter. Have you ever witnessed karma strike this fast inside the emergency room? Detective Cole adjusted his badge and squared his shoulders. He had perfected this routine over 13 years, shape the narrative, control the story, paint himself as the protector. The system always believed cops over criminals, especially when those criminals looked like her. Captain Morris, Cole began, his voice steady and rehearsed. I was conducting routine patrol when I observed a suspicious individual attempting to break into vehicles in the hospital parking structure. He gestured toward Dr. Johnson, now sitting handcuffed in the hospital security office, dried blood crusting the corner of her mouth where his knee had connected with her jaw. The suspect was acting erratically, wearing what appeared to be stolen medical attire, and became extremely combative when I attempted to question her. Captain Morris, a heavy-set man in his 50s with 28 years on the force, nodded slowly. And what specifically made you suspect criminal activity, detective? Well, sir, she was moving suspiciously between vehicles, carrying what looked like drug paraphernalia. When I approached to investigate, she became verbally aggressive, screaming obscenities and claiming she worked here. Cole's eyes gleamed as he settled into his fabrication. These people always claimed to be doctors, lawyers, CEOs, anything to avoid accountability. From across the security office, 2 other officers, Sanchez and Williams, exchanged knowing glances. They had heard Cole tell variations of this story countless times. Different faces, same script, same outcome. She kept screaming about saving lives and having patients waiting, Cole continued, his voice dripping with contempt. I've seen this performance before, Captain. Drug addicts often create elaborate cover stories. I suspected she was either stealing medical supplies to sell or casing vehicles for valuables. Captain Morris leaned back in his chair. Did she attempt to resist arrest? Absolutely. The suspect became physically violent when I attempted to restrain her for her own safety and the safety of others. She was clearly under the influence of narcotics, dilated pupils, aggressive behavior, irrational statements. Cole's hand trembled almost imperceptibly as he spoke, the only crack in his polished performance. The hospital security guard taking notes frowned slightly. Something about this story didn't sit right with him, but who was he to question a decorated detective? Officer Sanchez, Captain Morris called. Can you corroborate Detective Cole's account? Sanchez stood, his uniform crisp and professional. Yes, sir. I arrived moments after Detective Cole initiated contact. The suspect was clearly agitated and non-compliant. Detective Cole handled the situation with textbook precision. And the alleged excessive force? Morris inquired, glancing at the visible injuries on Dr. Johnson's face. Cole's jaw tightened. Captain, I used only the force necessary to subdue a violent suspect who was posing a clear danger to herself and others. Her injuries resulted directly from her resistance to lawful commands. He pulled out his phone, swiping to video footage that conveniently started mid-confrontation. I have partial footage here, though unfortunately my body camera experienced a battery malfunction this morning. The lie rolled off his tongue like syrup. How convenient, Dr. Johnson murmured, speaking for the first time since being dragged into the security office. I'm sorry. Captain Morris raised an eyebrow. Nothing, Captain, she replied calmly, though her eyes blazed with barely contained fury. Cole continued his performance. What we're witnessing here is a classic case of criminal behavior deflected through false accusations. She was trespassing in a restricted parking area, carrying suspicious medical equipment that I believe was stolen, and when confronted, immediately claimed discrimination. Captain Morris nodded thoughtfully. Detective Cole, in your 13 years of service, have you encountered similar situations? Unfortunately, yes, sir. There's a disturbing pattern in certain communities. Individuals believe they're above the law, that rules don't apply to them. When held accountable, they immediately cry racism or police brutality. Cole's voice rose with manufactured indignation. It's honestly insulting to genuine victims of discrimination. Several hospital security personnel nodded in agreement. They had seen similar stories on the news, heard similar narratives on talk radio. It felt familiar, almost comfortable. The suspect claims she's a doctor here, Cole made exaggerated air quotes, but she couldn't provide valid identification, any hospital credentials, or any legitimate reason for possessing controlled medical substances. Officer Williams stepped forward. If I may add, Captain, the suspect was carrying what appeared to be prescription pads, surgical instruments, and controlled medications. We suspect she may be involved in some kind of medical fraud or drug distribution ring. Captain Morris looked intrigued. Drug distribution? Yes, sir. Cole jumped back in, sensing momentum building. These items had hospital markings, patient information, and sensitive medical data. No legitimate citizen would have unsecured access to materials like this. We believe she may have been planning to impersonate medical staff to gain access to pharmaceutical supplies. The irony was suffocating, but Cole pressed forward, oblivious to the trap he was setting for himself. In my professional opinion, he concluded, this is simply another case of criminal behavior disguised as a civil rights issue. She knows if she can make this about race, about alleged police brutality, she can distract from her actual crimes. It's a calculated manipulation of public sympathy. He turned to face Dr. Johnson directly, his eyes cold and contemptuous. These people think they can just show up anywhere, any hospital, any facility, any building they want. And when they're stopped, they scream discrimination. Well, not on my watch. The words hung in the air like toxic gas. Several security staff members shifted uncomfortably, while others maintained carefully neutral expressions. Captain, Officer Sanchez added, I recommend we proceed with charges of trespassing, possession of stolen property, resisting arrest, and assault on a police officer. The suspect's attempt to frame this as racial profiling is clearly a desperate defense strategy. Cole allowed himself a small smile. This was going exactly according to plan. Another case, another arrest, another reminder that the system worked the way it was designed to. People stayed in their place, or they learned painful lessons. Furthermore, he continued, emboldened by the supportive atmosphere, I want to emphasize my restraint. The suspect was clearly dangerous, possibly armed with medical instruments that could be used as weapons. A less experienced officer might have used lethal force. Captain Morris nodded gravely. Your professionalism is noted, Detective Cole. In her chair, Dr. Johnson sat perfectly still, her hands folded despite the handcuffs cutting into her wrists. Her expression remained eerily calm, almost peaceful, but anyone looking closely would have noticed the slight upturn at the corners of her mouth. She was memorizing every lie, every fabrication, every detail that would soon dismantle Cole's career piece by piece. The detective had no idea he was performing for the very person who had the authority to destroy him. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Detective? Captain Morris asked. Cole straightened his shoulders, confidence radiating from every pore. Just that incidents like this remind us why we need strong, decisive law enforcement. Some people only understand authority when it's backed by force. The suspect learned today that actions have consequences. He had no idea how prophetic those words would become. Captain Morris stood. The charges seem clear. We'll process the suspect and transfer her to county holding. As Cole turned to leave the security office, he caught Dr. Johnson's eye one final time. He smirked at her, a gesture of complete dominance, total victory. It would be the last moment of triumph in his entire career. Detective Cole, Dr. Johnson said quietly, her voice carrying an unmistakable authority that made several people in the room pause. Before you leave, I have something to say. Cole turned back, irritation flickering across his face. The suspect will have her opportunity to speak at her arraignment. Actually, Dr. Johnson replied, her tone shifting into something that made the hospital security director suddenly go very still, I think we should clarify a few things right now. Captain Morris frowned. This is highly irregular. So is assaulting the chief of emergency medicine in her own hospital parking lot, Dr. Johnson said calmly. The room went absolutely silent. The hospital security director, Marcus Thompson, who had been quietly observing from the corner, suddenly stepped forward, his face draining of color. Detective Cole, Thompson said, his voice tight, did you verify this woman's identity before the arrest? She refused to provide identification, Cole snapped. Standard procedure is to detain first, verify later when dealing with hostile suspects. Hostile suspects, Dr. Johnson repeated slowly. Is that what you call a woman who just completed a 16-hour shift performing emergency surgery? She turned her attention to Captain Morris. Captain, I'd like to formally request that several things be verified before we proceed further with Detective Cole's creative narrative. Morris shifted uncomfortably. Something about this woman's demeanor was beginning to penetrate the fog of assumptions. What kind of verification? First, I'd like someone to call the emergency department and ask them who is currently listed as Chief of Emergency Medicine. Dr. Johnson's voice was steady, professional. The main number is 5557200. Ask for the administrative desk. Thompson was already pulling out his phone, his hands shaking. Second, Dr. Johnson continued, I'd like someone to check the hospital's parking registry. My vehicle, a Mercedes S-Class, license plate MD2847, should be registered to Dr. Amara Johnson at this facility. And third, she said, her eyes locking onto Cole's increasingly pale face, I'd like someone to pull up the hospital security camera footage from parking level 3, cameras 12 through 18, timestamp 7:23 to 7:45 this morning. This is absurd, Cole protested. The suspect is trying to delay processing. The suspect, Dr. Johnson replied icily, is trying to prevent you from making the biggest mistake of your career. Though I suspect we're already past that point. Thompson had his phone to his ear. Yes, this is Marcus Thompson from security. I need to verify. Yes, I'll hold. He covered the mouthpiece. They're checking the staff directory. The silence stretched like taffy while everyone waited. Yes, I'm here, Thompson said into the phone. His face went from pale to ashen. And her vehicle registration? Mercedes, yes. License MD 2847. He lowered the phone slowly. Captain Morris, we have a significant problem. What kind of problem? Morris demanded. Thompson looked at Dr. Johnson with something approaching horror. Dr. Amara Johnson is indeed our chief of emergency medicine. She's been with this hospital for 12 years. She's currently listed as on duty, coming off a double shift that started yesterday at 3 p.m. The room erupted in chaos. That's impossible, Cole sputtered. Look at her. She was sneaking around vehicles. She had drug paraphernalia. Detective Cole, Thompson interrupted, his voice sharp, what you identified as drug paraphernalia was her medical bag. What you called stolen prescription pads were legitimate hospital forms. And what you described as suspicious behavior was a surgeon checking on her vehicle after one of the longest shifts of her career. Dr. Johnson remained perfectly calm while the world collapsed around Detective Cole. Furthermore, Thompson continued, pulling up something on his tablet, I'm looking at our security footage right now. Dr. Johnson, would you like me to play this for everyone? Please do, she said quietly. Thompson turned the tablet screen toward the room. The footage showed Dr. Johnson, clearly exhausted, walking toward her Mercedes. She was carrying her medical bag and checking her phone. Then Detective Cole appeared, approaching her aggressively. Notice, Dr. Johnson narrated calmly, that I'm simply walking to my registered vehicle in my assigned parking space. Detective Cole approaches without identifying himself as law enforcement. The footage continued. Cole grabbed her arm roughly. Here's where I ask him to identify himself and explain why he's touching me, Dr. Johnson said. You can see my hospital badge clearly visible on my jacket. You can see me reaching for my wallet to provide additional identification. The video showed Cole's violent response, the slam against the vehicle, the knee to her ribs, her medical bag exploding across the pavement. And here, Dr. Johnson's voice remained steady despite the violence playing out on screen, is where Detective Cole tells me, and I quote, "You people always have excuses." Captain Morris was staring at the screen, his face rigid. "The audio is available as well," Thompson said quietly. "Would you like me to play it?" "Yes," Dr. Johnson said. "I think everyone should hear exactly what Detective Cole's definition of professional law enforcement sounds like." Thompson unmuted the video. Cole's voice filled the security office, dripping with venom and contempt. "Another thug trying to break into cars. You people always have excuses. Shut your mouth before I shut it for you. Nobody's going to believe some ghetto trash over a decorated detective." Cole approached Dr. Johnson without probable cause, without reasonable suspicion, without any legitimate law enforcement purpose. You will hear him call her another thug. You will watch him assault her violently. You will hear him say, "You people always have excuses." Chen's voice grew stronger. And then you will watch as Detective Cole created an elaborate lie, a false police report claiming Dr. Johnson was trespassing, carrying stolen property, resisting arrest. You will hear him testify under oath to things the video evidence clearly disproves. She turned back to the jury. This isn't just about one bad encounter. This is about a law enforcement officer who weaponized his badge, who used his authority to target people based on the color of their skin, who believed he was untouchable. Chen walked back to her table. The evidence will prove beyond any reasonable doubt that Detective Cole deprived Dr. Johnson of her constitutional rights under color of law. And we will ask you to hold him accountable. Brennan's opening statement was weaker, relying on the split-second decision defense and claiming Cole had simply made a mistake in judgment, rather than a criminal act. Even he seemed unconvinced by his own words. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. First, they called Marcus Thompson, the hospital security director, who testified about Dr. Johnson's position, her parking assignment, and the security footage. The videos were played in their entirety, every angle, every moment, every word captured in crystal clarity. Jurors visibly flinched when Cole's knee connected with Dr. Johnson's ribs. Next came Officer Williams, Cole's colleague who had been at the scene. Under immunity from prosecution, he testified about Cole's history of targeting minorities and the department's culture of protecting problematic officers. "How many times did you witness Detective Cole use excessive force?" Chen asked. "Dozens of times," Williams admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe more. It was just normal. We all knew Cole had a thing about certain people. Nobody said anything because you don't rat out fellow officers. And when complaints were filed, they disappeared. Supervisors would mark them unsubstantiated, without real investigations. It was easier than dealing with the union, the media, the paperwork." The testimony painted a picture of systemic failure, not just individual misconduct. Dr. Amara Johnson took the stand on the third day of trial. The courtroom fell silent as she was sworn in. "Dr. Johnson," Chen began gently, "can you tell the jury about your career?" Dr. Johnson spoke clearly and professionally, describing her education, her training, her 12 years at Metropolitan Hospital. She explained her role as Chief of Emergency Medicine, her responsibilities, her commitment to saving lives regardless of who walked through those emergency room doors. "Tell us about March 15th, Chen said. Dr. Johnson's voice remained steady as she recounted the double shift, a mass casualty incident from a highway pileup that required all hands on deck for 16 consecutive hours. "I had just finished the last surgery around 7:15 a.m., she explained. "A young man, 19 years old, who'd been in a motorcycle accident. We'd saved his life, but it was close. I was exhausted, emotionally drained, running on adrenaline and caffeine." "What happened when you left the hospital?" "I walked to my vehicle. I was checking my phone, texts from my husband asking if I was okay, messages from my children. I remember feeling grateful that we'd saved everyone from that accident. I remember thinking about going home, hugging my family, sleeping for 12 hours. Her voice remained controlled, but her hands tightened slightly on the armrest. Then Detective Cole appeared. He didn't identify himself as law enforcement. He didn't ask questions. He grabbed my arm and said, "Another thug trying to break into cars." She looked directly at the jury. "I've experienced racism before. Microaggressions, assumptions, being followed in stores. But I've never experienced anything like what happened next. Dr. Johnson described the assault in clinical detail, using medical terminology to describe her injuries: 3 fractured ribs, grade 2 concussion, multiple contusions, lacerations from handcuffs. When Detective Cole slammed me against my vehicle, I had one thought, she said quietly. I had spent 16 hours saving lives, and now someone sworn to protect and serve was potentially ending mine. The cross-examination was brief and ineffective. Brennan tried to suggest Dr. Johnson had been uncooperative or could have de-escalated, but the video evidence made those arguments absurd. The prosecution rested after presenting testimony from 73 people Cole had wrongfully arrested or detained over the years. Each story was similar: unprovoked stops, aggressive confrontations, false charges, lives disrupted. The defense case lasted less than a day. Brennan called character witnesses: Cole's pastor, his former football coach, his mother, who testified he was a good man who had made a mistake. But under cross-examination, none could explain away the video evidence or the 13-year pattern of misconduct. Cole himself declined to testify, which Chen noted pointedly in her closing argument. Ladies and gentlemen, Chen addressed the jury one final time, Detective Cole has had every opportunity to explain his actions. He could have testified. He could have provided some justification for why he assaulted Dr. Johnson, why he filed false reports, why he lied under oath. She gestured toward the defense table. But he didn't. Because there is no justification. There is no excuse. There is only a badge that was used as a weapon and a pattern of constitutional violations that can no longer be ignored. Chen walked along the jury box. Dr. Johnson didn't ask to become the face of police accountability. She just wanted to go home after saving lives. But when Detective Cole targeted her, he chose the wrong victim. He chose someone with the evidence, the resources, and the courage to expose what he'd been doing for 13 years. She turned back to face Cole. You've seen the videos. You've heard the testimony. You've seen the pattern. Detective Ryan Cole deprived Dr. Amara Johnson of her constitutional rights under color of law. He assaulted her. He falsely arrested her. He filed false reports. He committed perjury. Chen returned to the jury. The evidence is overwhelming. The law is clear. I ask you to return a verdict of guilty on all counts and send a message that no one, not even police officers, is above the law. Brennan's closing was an appeal to sympathy, talk of Cole's family, his service record, his one mistake. It fell flat against the mountain of evidence. The jury deliberated for 7 hours. When they returned, the forewoman stood solemnly. On the charge of deprivation of rights under color of law, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of assault and battery, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of false imprisonment, we find the defendant guilty. 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 All 18 counts. Cole collapsed into his chair as if he'd been struck. Brennan put a steadying hand on his shoulder. Judge Morrison set sentencing for 6 weeks later, denying bail. The defendant has shown a pattern of abusing his authority. He will remain in custody pending sentencing. As marshals led Cole away in handcuffs, he looked back one final time at the courtroom. Dr. Johnson sat in the front row beside her husband, her expression calm but resolute. Their eyes met for a brief moment. Cole finally understood. He hadn't just assaulted a random woman. He'd assaulted justice itself. And justice, as it turned out, had a very long memory and an even longer reach. Outside the courthouse, Dr. Johnson addressed the media. This verdict isn't just about me, she said, cameras flashing. It's about the 73 people whose voices were finally heard. It's about accountability. It's about ensuring that the oath law enforcement officers take, to protect and serve, actually means something. She paused, composing herself. Detective Cole said that actions have consequences. Today, he learned that lesson. I hope every officer watching understands that the badge is a responsibility, not a shield for misconduct. Special Agent Johnson put his arm around his wife as they descended the courthouse steps. Justice, delayed for 13 years and for 73 victims, had finally arrived. And it had arrived with the force of a sledgehammer. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Williams set down her gavel, the echo of justice reverberating through marble halls that had witnessed centuries of verdicts. But this wasn't just another case closing. This was history opening a door that had been locked for far too long. Officer Martinez now sits behind bars, stripped of his badge, his authority, his freedom. The same system that protected him for 15 years finally held him accountable. But here's what you need to understand. This victory didn't happen because the system suddenly decided to work. It happened because one person refused to be silenced. Think about that for a moment. How many victims came before Judge Williams? How many complaints were filed, investigated, and mysteriously dismissed? How many families demanded justice only to be told their evidence wasn't sufficient, their word wasn't credible, their pain wasn't enough? 47 complaints over 15 years. 47 voices crying out for help. 47 opportunities for the system to stop a predator in uniform. And 47 times the system chose to look the other way. Until one morning when Officer Martinez made the fatal mistake of brutalizing someone with the power to fight back. But here's the uncomfortable truth we need to face. Judge Williams was lucky. Not because she was assaulted. No one is lucky to be victimized. She was lucky because she had the platform, the knowledge, and the authority to demand accountability. She was lucky because her story couldn't be buried in a file cabinet or dismissed as unsubstantiated. What about everyone else? What about the grandmother Martinez called racial slurs while terrorizing her in her own neighborhood? What about the teenager he planted drugs on to justify an illegal arrest? What about the doctor he brutalized for the crime of living in the wrong neighborhood? They deserved the same justice. They deserved the same moment of vindication. They deserved to see their abuser held accountable. And so do you. If you're watching this video right now, chances are you've been touched by injustice in some way. Maybe you've experienced it directly, a traffic stop that escalated unnecessarily, an arrest that felt motivated by something other than law enforcement, an encounter with authority that left you feeling violated and powerless. Or maybe you know someone who has. A family member, a friend, a neighbor, someone whose story didn't end with accountability, but with trauma, legal bills, and the bitter knowledge that the system failed them. This story, Judge Williams's story, proves that change is possible. But it also reveals how much work remains to be done. The federal investigation Judge Williams ordered uncovered systemic corruption that infected an entire department. 12 officers terminated. 4 supervisors criminally charged. 432 tainted cases reopened. Dozens of wrongfully convicted defendants released from prison. All of that justice, all of those lives finally getting their day in court, happened because one person refused to accept that badge equals immunity. But we can't wait for judges to be assaulted before we demand accountability. We can't wait for viral videos before we acknowledge that complaints have merit. We can't wait for national outrage before we protect the vulnerable. The change has to start with us. With you. Right now. Here's what I'm asking you to do today, not tomorrow, not next week, but right now while this story is fresh in your mind and fire is burning in your heart. First, share this story. Not just because it's dramatic or satisfying to watch a bully finally face consequences. Share it because someone in your network needs to see it. Someone who has been told their complaint doesn't matter. Someone who has been dismissed, ignored, or silenced. Someone who needs to know that justice is still possible. Your share might reach that one person who's on the verge of giving up, who's convinced that fighting back is pointless, who needs to see proof that the system can be forced to work when good people refuse to stay silent. Second, hit that like button. I know it sounds simple, even trivial. But here's what that like represents. It tells the algorithm that stories of accountability matter. It signals that people want to see justice delivered, not just injustice documented. It helps ensure that the next story like this reaches even more people, creating a network of informed citizens who refuse to accept abuse of power as normal. Every like is a vote for transparency. Every like is a demand for accountability. Every like is a reminder that we're watching and we're not looking away. Third, and most importantly, subscribe to this channel. Because Judge Williams's story isn't unique, it's just unusually visible. Stories like this happen every single day in courtrooms, police stations, and government offices across this nation. The difference is that most of them never get told. Most victims never get their vindication. Most bullies never face their reckoning. By subscribing, you're joining a community that refuses to let injustice hide in the shadows. You're supporting a platform that gives voice to the voiceless and visibility to the invisible. You're ensuring that the next Officer Martinez knows that someone is watching, someone is recording, and someone will hold them accountable. But beyond the shares, likes, and subscriptions, I want you to do something else. Something harder. Something that actually creates change in your community. Pay attention to what's happening around you. When you hear about police misconduct complaints in your city, don't just scroll past. Ask questions. What happened to those complaints? Were they investigated? What was the outcome? Who made the decision? Attend city council meetings when police accountability is on the agenda. Your presence matters. Your voice matters. Elected officials pay attention when citizens show up demanding transparency. Support organizations fighting for criminal justice reform. Whether it's the ACLU, local community oversight boards, or grassroots movements demanding change, these groups need resources to continue their work. Your donation, whether it's $5 or $5,000, funds the lawyers who fight cases like Judge Williams's every single day. And if you've personally experienced police misconduct, document everything. Write down what happened while the memory is fresh. Gather any evidence you can, receipts, photos, witness names. File a formal complaint, even if you're convinced it won't go anywhere. Because every documented complaint creates a paper trail. And when enough paper trails point to the same officer or the same department, even the most protective system eventually has to respond. Your complaint might be the one that finally tips the scales. Your documentation might be the evidence that corroborates someone else's story. Your courage to come forward might give someone else the strength to do the same. Remember those 47 complaints against Officer Martinez that were dismissed over 15 years? Imagine if even half of those complainants had given up, convinced that reporting was pointless. Would there have been enough documented evidence to support the federal investigation that finally brought him down? Would those 432 tainted cases have been reopened? Would those wrongfully convicted defendants have been released? Your story matters. Your voice matters. Your demand for accountability matters. Now, I know some of you are thinking, this is all well and good, but Judge Williams won. I won. She had power and authority and legal knowledge that I don't have. What chance do ordinary people have against the system? And you're right to ask that question. The power imbalance is real. The system is designed to protect itself. The odds are stacked against individual citizens demanding accountability from armed authorities who investigate themselves. But here's what Judge Williams proved. The system can be forced to work when the right pressure is applied in the right way at the right time. And that pressure doesn't always come from judges and federal investigations. Sometimes it comes from viral videos that make abuse impossible to ignore. Sometimes it comes from community organizing that forces elected officials to respond. Sometimes it comes from one person's courage inspiring a movement that demands change. You don't need to be a federal judge to make a difference. You just need to refuse to accept that abuse of power is normal. You need to stand up when you witness injustice. You need to support victims when they come forward. You need to vote for accountability when elections come around. The young law clerk who witnessed Judge Williams's historic verdict was just a first-year legal intern. No power, no authority, no national platform. But watching one person refuse to be intimidated changed the entire trajectory of her life. She's now fighting civil rights cases across the nation, delivering justice to people who never thought they'd see it. Your decision to engage with this story, to share it, to discuss it, to let it change how you think about justice and accountability, might have a similar ripple effect that you'll never even see. Maybe someone watches this video because you shared it and decides to report misconduct they witnessed. Maybe that report becomes the evidence that stops the next Officer Martinez before he destroys 432 lives. Maybe one of those lives that gets saved goes on to do something extraordinary that changes thousands more lives. You'll never know the full impact of standing up for what's right. But I can promise you this, doing nothing guarantees that nothing changes. So here's my final challenge to you. Don't let this story end when the video stops. Don't let Judge Williams's courage be just another viral moment that gets forgotten when the next dramatic story comes along. Let this be the moment you decide that you're done accepting injustice as inevitable. Let this be the moment you commit to being the kind of person who stands up, speaks out, and demands accountability. Let this be the moment you recognize that justice doesn't just happen, it requires good people to fight for it every single day. Share this story with everyone you know. Make it impossible to ignore. Make it unavoidable. Make it the conversation that happens at dinner tables, break rooms, and community meetings across this nation. Hit that like button and send a message that stories of accountability and courage deserve to be amplified above the noise. Subscribe to this channel and join a community of people who refuse to look away when injustice happens, who celebrate when bullies finally face consequences, and who believe that every person, regardless of their race, their wealth, or their position, deserves equal protection under the law. Because at the end of the day, that's what Judge Williams's story is really about. It's not about one bad cop getting what he deserved. It's about a system that finally, after 15 years of complaints and 47 ignored victims, delivered the justice it promised from the very beginning. Your voice can help ensure that the next victim doesn't have to wait 15 years. The next complaint doesn't get ignored. The next Officer Martinez faces consequences before he destroys hundreds of lives. Justice delayed is justice denied. But justice delivered, justice fought for, demanded, and won, is justice for all. Now go share this story. Hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel. And most importantly, decide right now that you're going to be part of the solution. Because sometimes justice doesn't just wear a blindfold. Sometimes justice wears the face of ordinary people who refuse to stay silent. Sometimes justice carries the voice of citizens who demand accountability. And sometimes, when the moment is right, justice comes from you. Your turn. Your voice. Your moment to choose what kind of world you want to live in. Don't waste it.